The distress signal reached the Galactic Union Council chambers at 2:37 p.m. Standard Galactic Time, and within minutes, every species representative knew that 40,000 Zhilk'thar civilians were about to die. The message came from Apex Forge, a mining colony carved into a massive asteroid orbiting a binary star system in the Helix sector. For 32 years, the Zhilk'thar had operated the facility without incident, extracting rare stellar metals from the asteroid's core while maintaining a delicate dance with the gravitational forces of the twin stars. The Zhilk'thar were good at delicate work. Their species had evolved on a low-gravity moon, leaving them with fragile exoskeletons and 6 spindly limbs, but their minds were sharp and their engineering was flawless. Apex Forge had been a testament to that precision. Until someone destroyed it. The Stellar Shielding Array, a network of satellites that protected the station from radiation bursts, went offline at 2:22 p.m. 15 minutes later, one of the binary stars began an accelerated collapse. The science was clear and terrifying. Someone had used illegal stellar manipulation technology to destabilize the star's fusion processes. What should have been a natural death taking millions of years was now happening in days, maybe hours. The expanding wave of radiation was already lethal. The gravitational distortions were tearing Apex Forge apart from the inside. Station Commander Zhilk'thar sent the distress call knowing it was likely futile. He was a veteran of the Zhilk'thar Engineering Corps, old enough to have seen 3 station constructions in his lifetime, and he understood mathematics. 40,000 civilians needed evacuation. His species could barely survive in armored environmental suits for more than a few hours. Any rescue fleet would need to maintain position in a radiation zone that would cook unshielded vessels in minutes. The calculations were brutal and simple. Not enough time, not enough ships, not enough shielding technology in the known galaxy to make it work. The Galactic Union convened within the hour. Representatives from 200 species filled the Grand Chamber on Unity Prime, their various forms of communication translating through the Council's systems into a cacophony of debate. The T'Lari, a species of energy beings, ran probability simulations. The Horgath, massive silicon-based creatures who lived for centuries, consulted their historical archives for precedent. The X-Hen, telepathic and deeply empathetic, broadcast waves of sorrow that made sensitive species weep openly. Every analysis reached the same conclusion. A rescue operation would require ships to remain in the death zone for a minimum of 8 hours to evacuate all civilians. Current shielding technology could protect vessels for perhaps 90 minutes before catastrophic failure. Even if they sent every available ship from nearby sectors, they would lose thousands of rescuers to save thousands of civilians. The mathematics were merciless. High Chancellor Vortek, a Horgath who had led the Council for 40 years, made the announcement at 6:15 p.m. His voice, translated through the chamber's systems, carried the weight of geology, slow and inevitable. The Galactic Union declared Apex Forge a total loss. They would not authorize a rescue operation. They would observe a period of mourning. They would investigate who had caused this atrocity and bring them to justice. But they would not send ships to die alongside the Zhilk'thar. The decision was practical, rational, and by the standards of galactic civilization, correct. The needs of the many outweighed the needs of the few. Sacrifice the 40,000 to avoid sacrificing 40,000 more. It was cold mathematics, but mathematics did not care about temperature. Zhilk'thar received the response in his command center, deep in Apex Forge's core where the radiation had not yet penetrated. Around him, his people were already dying. The outer sections had been evacuated, but the radiation was seeping through compromised bulkheads. He could hear the chittering screams of larvae in the residential sections, the desperate humming of parents trying to calm them. His species communicated partially through vibration, and the entire station thrummed with terror. He looked at the negative response from the Galactic Union and felt something break inside his thorax. It was not anger. The Zhilk'thar did not really do anger. It was a deeper thing, a recognition of abandonment, of cosmic indifference. They would die here, and the galaxy would remember them with a memorial plaque. But the distress signal had not only reached the Galactic Union, it had also reached Earth. Admiral Torrance Blackwood was 53 years old, gray at the temples, with a face that looked like it had been carved from the same asteroid as Apex Forge. He had joined Earth's fledgling space Navy 30 years ago, back when humanity had just figured out faster-than-light travel and was still mapping the local systems. He had commanded vessels in the perimeter wars, fought off pirate raiders in the outer colonies, and negotiated first contact with 6 species. He was known for 3 things: tactical brilliance, insubordination, and an absolute refusal to leave anyone behind. He was in his office at Naval Command on Luna when the distress call reached Earth's communications network. He listened to it once, then played it again. Zhilk'thar's translated voice, flat and resigned, explaining the situation. 40,000 civilians. Collapsing star. Hours remaining. Request immediate assistance. Blackwood pulled up the Galactic Union's response and read it without expression. Then he stood up, straightened his uniform, and walked directly to the office of Fleet Admiral Rodriguez. Rodriguez was a political creature, someone who had navigated the complex waters of Earth's integration into galactic society with skill. He looked up when Blackwood entered without knocking, and his face immediately showed resignation. He knew that look. "We're not doing this," Rodriguez said before Blackwood could speak. "The Union already said no. They ran the numbers. It's impossible." 40,000 civilians, Blackwood said. "And how many of our people would we lose trying to save them? 1,000, 2,000. We're still new to the galactic community, Torrance. We can't afford to." 40,000 civilians, Blackwood repeated, his voice harder. "Families, children, and we have ships in range. Ships that would be destroyed attempting a rescue in a radiation zone that will kill any crew within hours. The Union already did the math. Every species with better technology than us already concluded it's impossible." "The Union isn't human." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. Outside his window, Earth hung in the black, blue, and green, and achingly beautiful. Humanity's homeworld, the cradle they had finally climbed out of 50 years ago. They were still infants in galactic terms, still learning the rules, still trying to prove they deserved a seat at the table. "What are you proposing?" Rodriguez asked, though he already knew. "Give me every ship we can spare, everything in the Helix sector and anything that can reach it within 12 hours. I'll take Task Force Prometheus." "Prometheus," Rodriguez smiled without humor. "Stealing fire from the gods, stealing back souls the gods have already written off. The Union will condemn it. Some of our allies will be angry. The political fallout. I don't care about the political fallout. I care about 40,000 people who are going to die because everyone decided the math doesn't work. Maybe they're right. Maybe we'll lose ships. But maybe, just maybe, humans are crazy enough to make it work anyway." Rodriguez studied Blackwood for a long moment. They had served together 20 years ago, had been friends before Rodriguez took the political track and Blackwood stayed in the field. Rodriguez knew exactly what kind of man was standing in front of him. The kind who would go anyway, orders or not, career or not. "If you do this and fail, you'll be court-martialed," Rodriguez said quietly. "If I do this and fail, court-martial will be the least of my problems." Rodriguez nodded slowly. Then he reached for his communication panel. "I'll get you your ships. You'll have to move fast. How are you planning to solve the shielding problem?" "I have someone working on that." Dr. Riko Taniyama was 38 years old, had 3 PhDs in exotic physics, and was considered either brilliant or completely insane by everyone who worked with her. She had joined Earth's research division because it was the only place that would fund her more unconventional ideas. The Galactic Union had strict standards for technology development. Earth, being new and desperate to catch up, was more willing to take risks. When Blackwood reached her lab at the Mars research facility, she was elbow-deep in a shield generator, her jumpsuit covered in grease, her short black hair sticking up at odd angles. She looked up when he entered, saw his expression, and immediately smiled. "You have an impossible problem that requires an untested solution," she said. 40,000 civilians trapped in a radiation death zone. We need to keep ships operational for at least 8 hours in an environment that will destroy standard shielding in 90 minutes. The entire Galactic Union says it can't be done. Riko wiped her hands on her jumpsuit, which only spread the grease around. Show me the data. Blackwood transferred the stellar collapse readings, the radiation projections, the gravitational distortion maps. Riko studied them on her datapad, her eyes moving rapidly. Blackwood knew that expression. She was already 10 steps ahead, running simulations in her mind. Standard shielding tries to maintain constant protection, she said after 2 minutes. Full power across all frequencies, all sections, all the time. That's why it burns out. The generators can't sustain that output in this kind of environment. So what's the alternative? We don't try to shield everything at once. We create a rotating blackout system. The shields protect different sections of the ship on a timed rotation. Forward shields at full power for 20 seconds, then they drop to minimal while aft shields go to maximum, then port, then starboard, constantly cycling. The generators get brief recovery periods. The ship is never completely unprotected, but we spread the load. Will it work? I have no idea. We've never tested it at this scale. The timing has to be perfect. If the rotation is too slow, sections will be exposed too long, too fast, and the generators won't recover. And we'll need to constantly adjust the frequencies to match the radiation spikes. She looked up at him, her eyes bright with the excitement of an impossible challenge. I'll need to be on the flagship to manage it in real time. You'll have a spot on the Defiant. How long do you need? To retrofit an entire task force. 8 hours if I push hard and don't sleep. Which I won't, because this is insane and I love insane. Blackwood smiled, the first genuine expression since he had heard the distress call. Get started. I'll send you every engineer we have. Within 3 hours, Task Force Prometheus was assembling. The HSCS Defiant, a heavy cruiser and Blackwood's flagship, was the core. Around it, 12 frigates, fast and maneuverable. 8 transport carriers, stripped down to maximize passenger capacity. 4 support vessels loaded with medical supplies, emergency equipment, and spare parts. 27 ships total, with crews that had been pulled from leave, given minimal briefing and asked a simple question. Who's willing to try something impossible? Every single crew member had volunteered. The modifications happened in a frenzy of activity. Riko coordinated from the Defiant, while engineering teams worked on every vessel simultaneously. Shield generators were rewired, new control systems installed, backup power systems brought online. The rotating blackout system was loaded into every ship's computer, with Riko's experimental AI managing the split-second timing. At 3:30 a.m., 12 hours after the distress call, Task Force Prometheus was ready. Blackwood stood on the bridge of the Defiant, looking at his crew. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Dax Thorne, was a lean man with sharp features and sharper instincts, someone who had come up through special operations before transferring to the Navy. His navigator, Lieutenant Yuki Sato, was young, but had proven herself in the outer colonies. His communications officer, Ensign Kwame Ademi, had worked as a translator before joining the service and spoke 6 human languages plus 4 alien ones. The Galactic Union has officially condemned this mission, Blackwood announced. They've declared us rogue actors. Earth Command has given us tacit approval, but will deny involvement if we fail. We are about to enter a radiation zone that the best minds in the galaxy say will kill us. Every simulation, every calculation, says this is impossible. He paused, looking at each face. But 40,000 people are counting on us to prove the simulations wrong. So let's go show the galaxy what impossible looks like when humans decide otherwise. The crew responded with a roar that would have alarmed any other species. Humans, Blackwood reflected, had never been particularly good at accepting limitations. Task Force Prometheus jumped at 4 a.m. They emerged in the Helix sector 9 hours later, and the sight that greeted them would haunt every crew member for the rest of their lives. The binary star system was dying in a way that violated every natural process. One of the stars, a yellow dwarf that should have burned peacefully for billions of years, was collapsing in on itself. Stellar material was compressing, heating, beginning the process that would eventually result in either a neutron star or complete dispersal. The radiation output was staggering. Space itself seemed to shimmer with deadly energy. And in the middle of this hellscape was Apex Forge. The asteroid was enormous, 30 kilometers across, with the mining colony burrowed into its core and sprawling across its surface. Even from a distance, they could see the damage. Sections were dark. Others were venting atmosphere. The docking arrays were twisted from gravitational stress. It looked like a corpse, something already dead just waiting for burial. Reading 40,000 life signs, Sato reported. They've retreated to the inner core. Radiation levels are. Admiral, it's worse than the projections. Much worse. Blackwood studied the readings. The radiation was spiking unpredictably, great waves of lethal energy pulsing from the dying star. The gravitational distortions were creating pockets of crushed spacetime that would tear a ship apart. And somewhere in that chaos were 40,000 Zhilk'thar who had already been told they were going to die. Riko, can the shields handle this? Dr. Taniyama was at her station, surrounded by holographic displays showing power flows and radiation frequencies. Her expression was focused, intense. I'm recalibrating now. The spikes are more extreme than predicted. We'll need to adjust the rotation faster. But yes, I think we can do this. Emphasis on think. Comms, hail Apex Forge, let them know we're here. Adami sent the signal, and for 30 seconds there was no response. Then a voice came through, translated from the Zhilk'thar's vibrational language into flat English. Unidentified fleet, this is Commander Zhilk'thar of Apex Forge. The Galactic Union has already informed us no rescue is coming. You should leave this system immediately. There is nothing you can. Commander Zhilk'thar, this is Admiral Torrance Blackwood of Earth's Navy. We're not here to debate possibilities. We're here to get your people out. Start organizing evacuation procedures. We're coming in. Silence. Then Zhilk'thar's voice returned, and for the first time there was something other than resignation in it. Something that might have been hope, fragile and dangerous. Admiral, our species has had limited contact with humanity. You are aware of the radiation levels. The Galactic Union calculated. The Galactic Union calculated wrong. We're specialists in doing what everyone says can't be done. Get your people ready to move. We'll have ships at your docking ports in 20 minutes. Blackwood closed the channel and turned to Thorne. Deploy the frigates in a rotating pattern. Fast insertions, maximum cargo, then back to the carriers. The Defiant stays at the edge of the zone to coordinate. I want constant communication, constant updates. The moment anything starts failing, I need to know. Understood. Thorne was already organizing the deployment, his fingers moving across tactical displays. Sir, about the shields. I know. We're about to find out if Riko is a genius or if we're all about to die. Either way, we'll make it count. The frigates moved in first. The moment they crossed into the radiation zone, every alarm on every ship started screaming. The rotating shield system activated, and to Riko's visible relief, it held. Barely. The shields flickered across different sections in a pattern too fast for human eyes to follow, managed by the AI she had programmed. The ships shuddered under the assault but maintained integrity. They reached Apex Forge's outer docking ports and immediately ran into the first problem. The docking clamps wouldn't engage. The massive mechanical systems that should have locked the human ships to the station's airlocks simply didn't respond. Trying manual override, reported the captain of the frigate Valiant. No response, the system is. It's like someone changed the access codes. Thorne looked at Blackwood and both men understood instantly. This wasn't disaster damage, this was sabotage. Bypass the clamps, Blackwood ordered. Hard seal if you have to, we don't have time for finesse. The frigate crews adapted quickly. They used emergency docking procedures, magnetic seals, and in some cases simply cut through airlocks with plasma torches. It was brutal and dangerous, but it worked. The first Zhilk'thar civilians began boarding the human ships. The Zhilk'thar were a revelation. Despite their terror, despite knowing they had been abandoned by the galaxy, they moved with extraordinary discipline. Parents carried larvae, which were the size of human children but far more fragile. Adults helped the elderly, whose exoskeletons were beginning to crack from age and stress. They organized themselves into groups, counted off, made sure no one was left behind, and they stared at the human crew members with their compound eyes, trying to understand why these strange bipedal creatures had come to die for them. The first wave of evacuations was successful. 6 frigates extracted approximately 4,000 Zhilk'thar and returned to the carriers. But the operation was taking longer than calculated. The sabotage docking systems meant every extraction required extra time, and time was the one resource they did not have. Radiation levels increasing, Riko reported from the Defiant. The star's collapse is accelerating. We've got maybe 6 hours before this whole system becomes unsurvivable even with our shields. Blackwood did the mathematics. 6 hours, 36,000 Zhilk'thar remaining. Current extraction rate would take 9 hours. They were going to fall short. Increase the tempo, he ordered. I want all frigates cycling constantly. No breaks, no delays, and someone figure out who's sabotaging those docking systems. That task fell to Thorne. While the evacuations continued, he assembled a team of 6 Marines and transferred to Apex Forge via shuttle. They wore heavy armor with additional radiation shielding, which would buy them perhaps 3 hours before exposure became fatal. Thorne had been in bad situations before, had conducted operations in hostile environments from the ice moons of the outer colonies to the high-gravity combat zones of the perimeter wars. But this was something else entirely. This was racing against physics itself. They entered Apex Forge through a cargo bay that had been partially crushed by gravitational stress. The interior was a nightmare. Emergency lighting cast everything in red. The air was hazy with particles from failing atmosphere processors. And everywhere there were Zhilk'thar, huddled in corridors waiting their turn for evacuation. They chittered at the human soldiers, a sound of fear and desperate hope. Thorne's team made their way to the station's central control room. If someone was actively sabotaging the docking systems, they would need access to the main computer core. Thorne's training in special operations had taught him to look for patterns, anomalies, things that didn't fit. And as they moved through Apex Forge, he noticed something odd. Certain sections had been sealed, but not by disaster damage. These were deliberate lockdowns secured from the inside. "We've got company," one of his Marines, a sharp-eyed woman named Private Keller, reported. "Motion sensors picking up movement in Section 7C, multiple contacts, non-Zhilk'thar." Thorne accessed the station's damaged sensor network. Section 7C was near the computer core, and the thermal signatures were wrong for Zhilk'thar. Too much heat, too much mass. Different species entirely. "Let's go introduce ourselves," Thorne said. They moved quickly through the damaged corridors, weapons ready. The radiation was seeping through even their heavy armor, and Thorne could see the dosimeter readings climbing. They had maybe 2 hours left before they would need to evacuate or face permanent damage. Section 7C was accessed through a blast door that had been manually sealed. Thorne's team placed shaped charges and blew it open. Beyond, they found exactly what he had feared and expected. 6 Vreskari operatives, heavily armed, working at computer terminals in what had once been a secondary control room. The Vreskari were reptilian, tall and broad, with armored scales and cold eyes. They were known throughout the galaxy as ruthless corporate operators, species that put profit above all else. And they were currently in the process of locking down every remaining docking port on Apex Forge. The lead Vreskari turned when the blast door exploded, his weapon already coming up. But Thorne's team had been waiting for exactly this, had already acquired targets. The firefight was brief and brutal. Thorne put 3 rounds into the lead operative, saw him fall. Keller took out 2 more. The remaining Vreskari tried to barricade themselves behind the terminals, returning fire with plasma weapons that scorched the walls. "Surrender!" Thorne shouted, knowing they wouldn't, knowing this was going to end only one way. One of the Vreskari triggered something on his terminal. Alarms began blaring. Thorne felt the station shudder and understood immediately. They had just activated a self-destruct sequence. "Cancel that now!" But the Vreskari just hissed something in their own language, and Thorne's translator caught part of it. "Already dead. All already dead." Thorne shot him, then rushed to the terminal. The display showed a countdown, 47 minutes until station-wide detonation. 47 minutes until 40,000 Zhilk'thar and everyone still on Apex Forge were reduced to debris. Defiant, this is Thorne. We've got a massive problem. On the bridge of the Defiant, Blackwood listened to Thorne's report with a sinking feeling in his chest. Sabotage, self-destruct, less than an hour. He looked at the evacuation numbers. 24,000 Zhilk'thar had been extracted. 16,000 remained. At current pace, they could maybe get another 8,000 before the station exploded. "Can you disarm it?" he asked Thorne. "Negative. The Vreskari used a system we don't have specs for. It's hardwired into the station's power core. I'd need hours just to figure out." "You don't have hours. None of us do." Blackwood forced himself to think, to find the angle, the solution that existed if he could just see it. 47 minutes. 16,000 lives. Mathematics that said half of them were going to die. Riko suddenly stood up from her station. "Admiral, I might have something. The Vreskari used stellar manipulation technology to trigger the star's collapse. That equipment is still active, still connected to the station's systems. If I can access it, I might be able to route the detonation command through it, create a feedback loop." "In English, Doctor." "I turn their own weapon against them." The feedback loop could either disrupt the detonation sequence or, even better, temporarily stabilize the stellar collapse. "Buy us more time." You're not exactly filling me with confidence." Riko smiled, and it was the smile of someone who lived for impossible challenges. "Admiral, if you wanted confidence, you wouldn't have brought me. Let me try." Blackwood nodded. What choice did he have? "Thorne, find that stellar manipulation equipment. Riko needs access." Thorne's team moved deeper into Apex Forge, following Riko's directions as she remotely accessed the station's fragmented computer systems. The stellar manipulation equipment was in a shielded laboratory in the station's lower levels, a section that had been heavily secured by the Vreskari. They blew through 3 more sealed doors, fought off 2 more operatives who had been left as guards, and finally reached the lab. The equipment was alien to human eyes, a complex array of graviton emitters and exotic particle generators. Riko studied it through the video feed from Thorne's helmet camera, her fingers flying across her console. "That's it. That's definitely Vreskari black market tech. Highly illegal, incredibly powerful. They used it to destabilize the star's fusion processes. Now I'm going to use it for something else entirely." She worked for 20 minutes while the countdown ticked away. On the bridge, Blackwood coordinated the ongoing evacuations, knowing that every second Riko bought them could mean dozens more lives saved. The frigates were pushing their crews to exhaustion, the carriers were cramming Zhilk'thar into every available space, and the shields were starting to show signs of stress. 2 frigates had already reported generator failures and had to withdraw. The countdown reached 10 minutes. 12,000 Zhilk'thar remained on Apex Forge. Blackwood was preparing to order a final withdrawal, to accept that they had saved as many as they could and leave the rest, when Riko made a sound of triumph. "Got it. Triggering the feedback loop now." The stellar manipulation equipment activated with a pulse of energy that every ship in the system registered. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the alarms on Apex Forge suddenly went silent. The countdown froze at 7 minutes and 43 seconds, then began counting upward instead. The detonation sequence was reversing, and beyond the station the dying star shuddered. Its collapse did not stop, could not stop, but it slowed. The radiation output dropped by 30%, the gravitational distortions eased. Riko had just bought them 3 more hours. Blackwood allowed himself 2 seconds of relief, then returned to the operation. "All ships increase extraction pace. We've got a window, let's use it." The human crews responded with renewed intensity. They knew what had almost happened, knew how close they had come to leaving people behind. The frigates dove in again and again, pushing their shields to the limit, cramming Zhilk'thar into every space. The Zhilk'thar, for their part, seemed to understand the urgency. They moved faster, organized themselves with military precision, helped load each other onto the human vessels. Commander Zhilk'thar remained in his control center, coordinating the evacuation even as sections of Apex Forge continued to fail around him. He watched on his displays as the human ships darted in and out, as his people were pulled from the jaws of death by these strange creatures from Earth. He had lived 73 years, had seen many things in his time, but he had never seen anything like this. The Galactic Union had abandoned them. Every species with better technology had run the calculations and concluded rescue was impossible. But humans, who were practically children on the galactic stage, had looked at the same calculations and simply refused to accept them. The numbers kept climbing. 28,000 evacuated, 32,000, 36,000. Each thousand represented lives that should have been lost, futures that should have been erased, children who would now grow up to remember the day humans proved impossible wrong. With 90 minutes remaining and only 3,000 Zhilk'thar left on the station, the stellar manipulation equipment suddenly failed. The feedback loop collapsed. The detonation countdown resumed from where it had frozen, 7 minutes and 43 seconds. And the star's collapse accelerated again, radiation levels spiking higher than before. "All ships, this is Defiant," Blackwood transmitted. "We've got less than 8 minutes. Final evacuation. Every ship that can move, get to those docking ports now. We're not leaving anyone behind." It became a race against time measured in seconds. Every frigate still operational dove toward Apex Forge simultaneously. The rotating shield systems were failing across the task force, generators burning out under the prolonged stress. 2 more frigates lost shielding entirely and had to emergency jump out of the system, their crews evacuated to medical ships with radiation poisoning. But the rest kept going. The Defiant moved from its position at the edge of the zone directly toward Apex Forge. It was a risk Blackwood knew he should not take. The flagship was the command center, the coordinator for the entire operation. If it was destroyed, the task force would lose cohesion. But there were still Zhilk'thar on that station, and every ship mattered. "Admiral, we're at 30% shield strength," Riko reported. Her voice was hoarse from hours of constant work. "Generator 2 is offline. Generator 3 is running at critical temperature. If we stay in this zone another 20 minutes, we won't need 20 minutes. Get me to those docking ports." The Defiant shuddered as it entered the heaviest radiation zone. Alarms were screaming. The view screen showed Apex Forge ahead, massive and dying, chunks of it breaking away under gravitational stress. And at its docking ports, human frigates were making their final runs. Thorne and his team were still on the station, helping load the last Zhilk'thar. They worked alongside Commander Zhilk'thar, who had refused to leave until every civilian was evacuated. The old Zhilk'thar moved with surprising speed, using his authority to organize the final groups, making sure larvae were secured, counting and recounting to ensure no one was forgotten. "That's the last of Section 4, Thorne reported. 67 civilians on Frigate Valiant. Section 5 is empty. Section 6 has. Commander, how many in Section 6? Zhilk'thar consulted his damaged console. 112. All heading to docking port 6C, he paused. And myself. I will be the last to leave. You're damn right about that. Let's move." They ran through collapsing corridors. Behind them, Apex Forge was coming apart. Bulkheads were failing. Atmosphere was venting. The entire structure groaned with the stress of gravitational forces it was never designed to withstand. Thorne could feel it through his boots, a vibration that spoke of imminent structural collapse. They reached docking port 6C with 3 minutes remaining. The last group of Zhilk'thar was there, huddled together. 112 civilians, including 20 larvae. And beyond the airlock, the Defiant was waiting, its docking clamps already secured. "Everybody on, now, go, go, go." The Zhilk'thar scrambled through the airlock. Thorne's Marines helped them, lifting larvae, supporting elderly who could barely walk. Zhilk'thar was doing the same, using his 6 limbs to help multiple people simultaneously. The countdown reached 2 minutes. 112 Zhilk'thar flowed through the airlock like water through a broken dam. 100, 80, 60. At 30 seconds, there were still 12 Zhilk'thar in the corridor, with Zhilk'thar at the rear making sure everyone got ahead of him. Thorne grabbed the commander and physically pushed him toward the airlock. "You don't get to play hero, move." 20 seconds. The last Zhilk'thar crossed the threshold. Thorne and his Marines followed, with Zhilk'thar right behind them. The airlock sealed. The docking clamps disengaged. The Defiant began to pull away. 10 seconds. The Defiant's engines flared to full power, pushing the heavy cruiser away from Apex Forge. Around them, the other frigates were doing the same, every human ship fleeing the death zone at maximum acceleration. 5 seconds. On the bridge, Blackwood watched the countdown and did something he rarely allowed himself. He prayed. Not to any specific god, but to the universe itself, to mathematics and physics and the basic principle that sometimes, just sometimes, the impossible should work out. 0. Apex Forge detonated. The entire 30-kilometer asteroid exploded in a cascade of energy that would have been beautiful if it wasn't the funeral pyre of a civilization's outpost. The explosion propagated outward, a sphere of destruction racing after the fleeing human ships. Behind it, the destabilized star completed its collapse, adding its own death throes to the chaos. The Defiant's shields, already at critical levels, took the brunt of the blast wave. Generator 3 exploded. Generator 4 simply gave up, its exotic particle emitters melted into slag. The ship's hull buckled. Atmosphere vented from 3 decks. And then they were through, jumping to faster-than-light speeds, leaving the Helix sector and its dying star behind. The task force emerged in a safe zone 3 light-years away. Blackwood immediately called for damage reports. 3 frigates had been lost with all hands in the final evacuation. 2 more were so heavily damaged they would need to be towed. The Defiant itself was barely holding together. Casualties were mounting, dozens of crew members suffering from radiation exposure, some critical, some fatal. But crammed into every available space on every surviving ship, from cargo holds to crew quarters to corridors, were 40,000 Zhilk'thar civilians. Not 36,000, not 39,000, 40,000, every single one. Blackwood sat down in his command chair for the first time in 18 hours. His hands were shaking slightly, adrenaline finally wearing off. Around him, his bridge crew was collapsing at their stations, exhaustion taking its toll. Riko had her head down on her console, asleep or unconscious, he could not tell which. "Admiral," Adami said, his voice barely a whisper, "we're receiving a transmission from the Galactic Union. High Chancellor Vortek himself. He's requesting to speak with you immediately. Tell him I'll call him back. We have casualties to treat and Zhilk'thar to take care of. Sir, he's very insistent. Apparently the entire galaxy is watching." Blackwood sighed and straightened his uniform. "Fine, put him through." The view screen activated, showing the massive form of High Chancellor Vortek. The Horgeth leader looked exactly as Blackwood had imagined. Ancient, imposing, the product of a species that measured time in geological terms. Behind him, the Galactic Council chambers were visible, filled with representatives from hundreds of species. "Admiral Blackwood," Vortek said, his translated voice resonating through the bridge. "You have defied a direct order from the Galactic Union. You have conducted a military operation that was explicitly prohibited. You have acted as a rogue element in violation of established protocols." Blackwood met the High Chancellor's gaze without flinching. "We saved 40,000 lives that you had written off. If that's a crime, then court-martial me. You do not understand the gravity. With respect, High Chancellor, I understand gravity perfectly. That's why we succeeded where you said we would fail. We didn't accept your calculations as the final word. We found another way." There was a long pause. Vortek's massive form shifted, and when he spoke again, there was something different in his tone. Not quite approval, but something close to it. "Your species is either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. Perhaps both. You lost 3 ships and over 200 crew members. Was it worth it?" Blackwood thought of the Zhilk'thar children in the cargo holds, the families reunited, the civilization that would continue because humans had refused to accept impossible. Yes, every single life we lost volunteered knowing the cost. They knew what they were doing and why. That's what makes it worth it. The Vreskari corporate hegemony has filed formal protests. They claim you murdered their operatives. Their operatives sabotaged a rescue operation and tried to murder 40,000 civilians. We have evidence. I'm happy to present it to the Council. Another pause. Then Vortek did something surprising. His massive head dipped slightly, a gesture that Blackwood's cultural database identified as a sign of respect among the Horgeth. The evidence has already been reviewed. The Vreskari are facing sanctions for their actions. As for Earth and Task Force Prometheus, the High Chancellor paused again, and Blackwood could see other council members in the background, their various forms moving in what appeared to be discussion. The Galactic Union officially condemns your violation of direct orders. However, we also acknowledge that your actions saved 40,000 innocent lives. You will face a formal inquiry, but given the circumstances and the outcome, I believe the inquiry will be lenient. I can live with lenient. Humanity has made quite an impression today, Admiral. You have shown the galaxy that sometimes courage and determination can overcome what logic says is impossible. This is a valuable lesson, though a dangerous one. I hope you will not make a habit of defying the Council. I hope the Council won't make a habit of writing off civilians as acceptable losses. Vortex expression, insofar as a silicon-based life form could have expressions, might have been amusement, diplomatic as well as brave. We shall see what the future holds, Admiral Blackwood. For now, bring the Zhilk'thar to Unity Prime. They will need temporary housing while their government arranges permanent relocation, and your crews will need medical attention. The Union will provide assistance. Thank you, High Chancellor. The transmission ended. Blackwood sat back and allowed himself a moment of weakness. His entire body ached. His head was pounding. He was fairly certain he had absorbed enough radiation to shorten his life by a few years. But 40,000 people who should have died were alive because his crews had refused to accept no as an answer. Admiral, Thorne said from the doorway, Commander Zhilk'thar is asking to speak with you. Should I tell him you're resting? No, send him up. Zhilk'thar arrived 5 minutes later, escorted by 2 Marines who were very carefully making sure the fragile Zhilk'thar commander did not bump into anything. The old insectoid looked even more fragile out of his element, his exoskeleton showing stress fractures, his limbs moving with the slight tremor of exhaustion, but his compound eyes were clear and focused. Admiral Blackwood, he said through the translator, his words accompanied by the characteristic chittering vibrations of his species. I am told that all 40,000 of my people survived, every single one. That's correct. The Galactic Union said rescue was impossible. We're not very good at accepting impossible. Zhilk'thar moved closer, his 6 limbs carrying him with surprising grace despite his obvious exhaustion. Why, your species barely knows mine. We have had perhaps a dozen diplomatic interactions. We are not allies. We have no treaties, no agreements, no obligations to one another. You lost ships. You lost crew members. Why did you do this? It was the same question High Chancellor Vortek had asked, but coming from Zhilk'thar it carried a different weight. This was not political inquiry. This was genuine incomprehension from someone whose species had been abandoned by the galaxy and saved by strangers. Blackwood considered his answer carefully. He thought about all the complex reasons, the political considerations, the humanitarian principles, the strategic implications. Then he discarded all of that and gave the simple truth. Because you called for help, because we could. Because 40,000 people deserved a chance to live and someone had to be willing to take the risk to give them that chance. That's what we do. That's what humans are. Zhilk'thar was silent for a long moment. Then he did something that surprised everyone on the bridge. He began to vibrate in a specific frequency, a sound that the translator caught and rendered as music. It was the Zhilk'thar Song of Life Debt, an ancient tradition that bound entire family lines across generations. My people owe yours a debt that can never be fully repaid, Zhilk'thar said, but we will try. From this day forward, the Zhilk'thar consider humanity to be our closest allies. Our resources, our knowledge, our loyalty, all are yours. We will not forget what you did here. We don't need repayment, Commander. We just need you and your people to live good lives. That's payment enough. Nevertheless, the debt exists, and the Zhilk'thar always honor their debts. Zhilk'thar bowed, a gesture that required him to bend his entire thorax. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you for proving that in a galaxy full of calculated decisions and cold mathematics, there are still those who believe some things are worth dying for. After Zhilk'thar left, Blackwood remained on the bridge, watching through the view screen as the fleet limped toward Unity Prime. The ships were damaged, the crews were exhausted, and they faced an uncertain future of inquiries and political consequences. But they had done something the galaxy said could not be done. They had looked at impossible and made it work anyway. Lieutenant Sato, who had somehow found the energy to remain at her station, spoke up quietly. "Admiral, I'm picking up multiple transmissions from across the galaxy. News services, government channels, private networks. They're all talking about us. About what we did. What are they saying? That humanity is either insane or incredible, possibly both. There are calls for formal alliance from a dozen species. The Zhilk'thar government has already announced they're relocating their entire industrial base to systems near Earth. Several other species are requesting details on our shield technology. And," she paused, a smile crossing her exhausted face, "recruitment for Earth's Navy just increased by 4,000%. Everyone wants to be part of Task Force Prometheus." Blackwood allowed himself a tired smile. Humanity had come to the galactic stage as relative newcomers, still learning the rules, still proving themselves. Today they had proven something important. Not that they were the strongest or the most advanced, but that they were the ones who would show up when everyone else had already given up. "Get me a channel to Earth Command," he said. "Let's see what Rodriguez has to say about all this." Rodriguez appeared on screen looking haggard and relieved in equal measure. "Torrance, you magnificent bastard. Do you have any idea what you've done? Saved 40,000 lives. Started a political firestorm, defied the Galactic Union, lost 3 ships, turned humanity into either heroes or reckless idiots depending on who you ask, and yes, saved 40,000 lives. The President wants to give you a medal. Fleet Command wants to court-martial you. The media wants to make you into a celebrity, and I just want to know how the hell you pulled it off. We had a brilliant engineer, a dedicated crew, and a refusal to accept no as an answer. That's the human advantage, Rodriguez. Everyone else in the galaxy is so advanced, so sophisticated, that they've forgotten how to be desperate and stubborn enough to make impossible work." Rodriguez laughed, a sound of exhaustion and pride. "Get back here in one piece. We'll sort out the politics later. For now, just know that Earth is proud of what you did. We're all proud." The transmission ended. Blackwood finally allowed himself to leave the bridge, trusting Thorne to coordinate the journey to Unity Prime. He made his way through the damaged corridors of the Defiant, past exhausted crew members who nodded or saluted as he passed, past medical bays filled with injured personnel receiving treatment. He stopped at one of the cargo holds that had been converted to temporary housing for Zhilk'thar refugees. Through the door he could see hundreds of them, families huddled together, larvae being tended by parents who had thought they would never see another day. They looked up when they saw him, their compound eyes reflecting the emergency lighting, and began that vibrating song again. The song of life debt, the song of gratitude that transcended species and language. One of the larvae, small enough to fit in a human's arms, moved toward him. Its parent chittered nervously, but Blackwood knelt down slowly, making himself less imposing. The larva reached out with one tiny limb and touched his hand, and Blackwood felt the vibration through his bones. A simple thank you, expressed in the most fundamental way. He stayed there for a few minutes, surrounded by the lives they had saved, and felt the weight of command settle differently on his shoulders. This was why they did it, not for glory or recognition or political advantage. For moments like this, where the mathematics stopped being abstract and became real, became people, became futures that would now happen because someone had been stubborn enough to try. Eventually, he made his way to his quarters and collapsed into his bunk without even removing his uniform. Sleep took him immediately, the sleep of someone who had pushed beyond all reasonable limits and somehow survived. He dreamed of stars collapsing and ships burning and impossible mathematics. But through it all, he heard that vibrating song, the sound of 40,000 voices saying that sometimes, just sometimes, courage and determination could rewrite what the universe said was possible. 3 weeks later, Task Force Prometheus arrived at Unity Prime to a reception that none of them had expected. Ships from across the galaxy were waiting, forming an honor corridor that the battered human fleet passed through. On Unity Prime itself, The Galactic Council had assembled, along with representatives from the Zhilk'thar government and thousands of civilians who had made the journey to thank their rescuers in person. The formal inquiry lasted 2 days. Blackwood testified about his decisions, his reasoning, his acceptance of the risks. The council asked pointed questions about protocol violations, unauthorized operations, and the precedent being set for future emergencies. But in the end, the verdict was exactly what High Chancellor Vortek had predicted: official condemnation for protocol violations, unofficial commendation for extraordinary achievement, a formal warning not to make it a habit, and absolutely no punishment beyond that. The Zhilk'thar government made several announcements. First, formal alliance with Earth, including technology sharing and mutual defense agreements. Second, the construction of a joint memorial at the site where Apex Forge had been, honoring both the Zhilk'thar who had died in the initial disaster and the human crew members who had given their lives in the rescue. Third, the renaming of their primary research facility to Blackwood Station, in honor of the Admiral who had refused to accept impossible. Blackwood attended the ceremonies with his crew, accepted the medals and commendations with appropriate humility, and gave the speeches that were required of him. But the moment that mattered most came on the final day, in a private meeting with Zhilk'thar and a group of Zhilk'thar who had been on Apex Forge. They gathered in a quiet garden on Unity Prime, away from the crowds and cameras. The Zhilk'thar had brought something with them, a piece of salvaged metal from Apex Forge that they had shaped and polished. On it they had inscribed the names of every human who had died in the rescue operation, 217 names in both English and Zhilk'thar script. "We will never forget," Zhilk'thar said simply. "Your people proved that the galaxy still has room for heroes, that some things are worth the cost, that impossible is just a word that humans ignore." Blackwood accepted the memorial, feeling its weight in his hands. 217 names. 217 people who had volunteered, who had known the risks, who had gone anyway. They deserved to be remembered. They would say it was worth it, he told Zhilk'thar. Every single one of them. They would say that 40,000 lives justified the sacrifice. That's the thing about humans. We're terrible at accepting losses, but when we do accept them, we make damn sure they mean something. 6 months later, the ruins of Apex Forge had been cleared away, and in their place, construction had begun on a new station. Not a mining colony this time, but something different. A rescue coordination facility, staffed jointly by humans and Zhilk'thar, equipped with the latest technology from both civilizations. A place dedicated to the principle that no distress call should go unanswered, that no one should be written off as an acceptable loss. They called it Prometheus Station. And on its hull, visible from across the system, they inscribed the words that had become humanity's unofficial motto in the galaxy. They called it impossible. We called it Tuesday. Because in the end, that was what humanity brought to the galactic community. Not superior technology or ancient wisdom or overwhelming force. Just a stubborn refusal to accept that some problems were too hard to solve, some rescues too dangerous to attempt, some lives too costly to save. The galaxy had called it a suicide mission. Humanity had called it a rescue operation. And 40,000 Zhilk'thar civilians, alive and thriving, were living proof that sometimes the human definition was the right one.